Hello and welcome to Louise Singleton Creations. In today's video, join me in the experimental process to see if I can create the snow globe effect inside some resin coasters with the help of my new extra deep coaster mould from Let's Resin. If you're ready for all the ups and downs, stay tuned and enjoy the video. So this is the mould I'm going to be using today, and when I received it and saw the depth of each cavity, I just knew that this was going to be perfect for my snow globe coaster idea. Right then, so my first job was to make a cardboard circle the same size as the inside of my coaster to use as a template. Next, I took an A4 sheet of acetate, or you might know it as transparency film, and this is what I'm going to be using to make my individual layers for my 3D scene. And onto my transparency film, I'm going to be adding my transparent PET tape, and these are individual pre-cut stickers which will be making up the scene. Next, I drew around my template onto my acetate sheet twice because each coaster is going to have 2 circles of acetate in there to make the 3D scene. So next I needed to look through all the images on the tape to choose my foreground image and my background image. I wanted the background image to be smaller in scale so that it looked like it was far off in the distance, and obviously the foreground image needed to be bigger. Then I peeled off the stickers and stuck them onto the transparency film. So after applying the background image, I cut out the second circle. Well, I didn't actually, I just cut the sheet in half. But anyway, I cut it out and I laid it on top of the background image, and that way I could position my foreground image perfectly, because obviously you can see through it, can't you? So it's nice and easy to position the foreground image and get it in just the right place. Now, all of this that I'm doing now is actually optional. You don't have to do this. If you wanted to, you could pour your layers of resin into your coaster mould and apply your stickers directly to the resin. But I find that a lot more fiddly. It's harder to position the stickers and get it just right, and it's also harder to trim the shape of them. So I would highly recommend doing it this way. Right, once I'd finished attaching my pictures, all I needed to do was cut around each circle and check to see if they would fit nicely into the mould. At this point, I was really curious and I wanted to visualise how it would look with space between the 2 layers. So I found some beads which were about the same height as the layers of resin will be, and I put them in there just so I could see it with a space between, and it looked really good. And that was when I started to really envision how the finished piece was going to look, and I got quite excited. So here's 2 others that I've done with a different PET tape, and I'm just testing out to see if those fit as well. I really loved those mountains, and I had a lot of fun finding out how to, get that scene to work with all the different stickers, but it was really a good process to go through. Okay, before making this video, I went through a lot of thinking time, deciding the best way to make the cavity in the inside of my coaster for the snow globe solution to go into, and I ended up deciding on using my silicone putty from Let's Resin, and I just about had enough left. My original plan was to just make 2 coasters, and that's why I only showed you me making 2 scenes to go, for 2 coasters. It didn't turn out like that. I ended up making 4, but never mind, I'll explain that later. Here, I didn't know that was going to happen, so I was kind of estimating how much I would need for just 2 coaster inserts. And here I'm just weighing the part A and part B out so that they're the same weight, because it's a 1-to-1 mixing ratio. After part A and part B were weighed out, I put them together and started to squeeze and twist both parts until they were thoroughly combined and there was no white streaks in there. So then I laid it out onto another piece of acetate just because it gives you a nice smooth finish, and I used 2 rolling guides and a rolling pin to roll it out to an even thickness. If you don't have rolling guides, I'm sure you'll find something else about the same height. Like a DVD box would work well on each side, just to make sure it's nice and even. Then I used a cookie cutter that was about the right size to cut out the circle, and then I repeated it with my leftover silicone putty. And I did actually have just a little bit of the silicone putty left over. And here you can see my attempt at just making another barrier inside the cookie cutter. I just didn't want to waste it, and I thought it might work, but it didn't really turn out very good. But yeah, that was... oh, doesn't that look bad? Anyway, it was just an idea. Okay then, onto the resin. Now today I haven't shown you the mixing and measuring and all of that with the resin. I know I normally do, but there's a lot to show you in this video, and yeah, I thought I could get away with just telling you what I used. So I used the fast cure resin from Let's Resin for this first layer, and I'm just pouring in enough to cover the base of the mould. And as usual, I overestimated the amount that I would need, and I ended up with resin left over. And I don't like to waste anything, so I ended up covering the base of 4 of the coaster moulds. You only see me doing 3 in this part, but there was still some in the pot, and I ended up just pouring it into the 4th one, and I thought I'd worry about the 4th one later. But what I did do for the 3rd one was I quickly made up another 2 layers of images so that I could have 3, and then off camera I sorted out the 4th one. Things never go to plan, do they, for me? So here I'm just making sure that there's no gaps in that base layer. There's a lot of bubbles there, as you can probably see. It's cold weather, and I'm using the fast cure resin. Fast cure resin is very thick and the most bubbly of all of the resins. And on top of that, the cold weather doesn't help when it comes to bubbles, but they did all come out once it had rested in the mould for a while. The thing is, though, I wasn't too worried about how clear the base layer would be. You're not really going to see much of it. And yeah, I just wanted it to cure quickly, and that's why I used the fast cure resin. I was, impatient to get on with the next step. But for the rest of the coasters, I go on to Let's Resin's regular resin because it's much clearer, and I'm pouring it deeper. This resin is better if you're pouring it just quite shallow. Anyway, enough of all of that. Let's get on to the fun bit. Let's add some pictures. So I'll start with the mountains, and all I did was I laid it on top and pressed down, and I kept on pressing and looking to see if there were any pockets of air trapped in there. And you see, I'm just pushing them from the middle outwards so that they come out of the sides and up to the top. And yeah, that is the only thing when you're adding things like this. You do trap pockets of air, but the great thing is it's transparent, so you can see the issues that are under there and just push them out. And it's quite good fun actually. So just keep going with that until it's all completely immersed and nice and clear. And I just repeated the process with all 3 of the coasters. So here you can see I just used my gloved finger just to smooth over the surface of the image. I wasn't too worried about whether it would be smooth, that really doesn't matter. But it is best if you can cover up the sticker completely, and then you know it's sealed onto that acetate and the water that's going to be in there isn't going to get under the sticker. So once I had those images immersed in the resin, I left it to cure for about 5 hours. When it had cured, I did actually put some more stickers onto the 4th one. So that's the other option you do have. Like I said before, instead of putting it onto acetate, you can put your sticker directly onto the resin, which is what I did with the 4th one. But I can tell you, it was very, very fiddly to do it that way. Right, so we've got 4 coasters, but only 2 inserts. So then I needed to come up with a solution for the other 2 coasters, and that wasn't difficult because I already had the idea in my head when I was first planning this project. So my other idea before I made these silicone putty inserts was to just cut strips of acetate to the right height that I wanted my layer to be, and then make them into a ring really, and stick the 2 ends together with sticky tape so that it was a ring. And that's probably the easiest way to do it. So there we have it. That was really easy, wasn't it? And actually, with hindsight, I would say that it was my favourite option. Yeah, it wasn't as perfect a circle as the cookie cutter option, you know, with the silicone putty, but it was definitely the easiest option, and I would recommend doing it this way, to be quite honest. So in the end, I was quite glad that I'd made up too much resin and ended up having to do this, because it gave you another alternative and I learned my favourite way at the same time. So you've just seen how simple and straightforward it was to put the silicone putty inserts into position, but now I need to seal my barriers that you've just seen me make into position as well. And for that I'm using UV resin, and as you can see I've just placed it in position and I'm going around the inside with the UV resin to make sure that it's sealed and my epoxy resin, which is coming next, won't leak through. And then I just cured it for 2 minutes with my UV light, also from Let's Resin. Once my acetate barriers and silicone inserts were in place, it was time to add the epoxy resin. And as I mentioned before, this time I'm using Let's Resin's regular epoxy, which is lovely and clear. I wasn't in a rush this time because I knew I was going to be doing the next part the next day, and so I had plenty of time for it to cure. I'm adding it very slowly, as you can see, and letting it find its own way. I didn't want to be moving the cup with the resin around too much because, you know, it was more likely that I would end up getting resin on top of the silicone insert, and I didn't want that. So I just took my time and allowed the resin to find its own way around. And here I am just filling it up. You have to look from all different angles to be able to see, especially with that clear barrier, whether it's actually reached the top of the barrier or not. That is the only tricky thing about those clear barriers. So anyway, as if by magic, it's the next day and it's time for the next step. Now, the silicone putty isn't really meant for this kind of application. It's very stiff, and so I did need to use my knife just to go in there a little bit to lever the insert out. But yeah, other than that, it was fine. Okay, so you're probably looking at the screen now and wondering what the heck is happening. What have you done, Lou? You've missed out a whole chunk of the video. Well, yes, I have missed out a whole chunk of the video. And that's because I was working out the best way to do it with my spare coasters and finding out what not to do. On this one, you're going to see the best way that I found to do it, rather than me confusing you with things that just didn't work very well. So that's why the coaster on the left and the right look like they're partially done, and that's because they are. Ignore those, okay? So what you've just missed while I've been waffling is me adding some UV resin around the rim of the coaster so that I can put my foreground layer on top of that and cure it under the UV lamp. However, before I put the foreground on, I did remember at last minute that I needed to add my glitter. The glitter needs to be added at this stage, and it is tricky knowing how much to put in. With hindsight, I wish I'd added more glitter, but I just didn't want to put too much in and hide the background image. Do you know what I mean? I was scared of adding too much and ended up not really adding enough. But anyway, this is the chunky opal glitter from Let's Resin. And after adding my glitter to the middle, I did decide to sprinkle a little bit onto my UV resin, which is still uncured, just to make it a little bit more interesting around the edges and help it to merge in, you know, the final image to merge in with that glittery centre. It would have looked a bit odd if there wasn't any glitter around the outside. So there, as you see, I've put my foreground layer on, and I just need to press it a little bit around the edges to make sure it's fully bonded with the UV resin before curing it. I repeated that process with the coaster on the top right, and then it was time for my top layer of epoxy resin, and once again it's Let's Resin's regular epoxy. I'm going almost to the top but not all the way. I'm not making it dome at the top, I'm just going almost to the top of the cavity, and that way it's going to still have a little bit of a ridge around the outside for my top layer later on, my flood coat that I'll be putting on at the end. It always helps if you've got that little bit of a ridge around the edge if you're adding a flood coat at the end. So the next day they were ready to take out of the moulds, and so we've got the one on the top right that still needs filling with liquid, and the one in the middle that also needs filling with liquid. The one on the bottom right, well, there's a story to that which I'll tell you in a minute, but look at this one. You can already see, even without any liquid in it, that it looks really good. Really, you could do this method without making it the snow globe technique. You don't need to do that at all. You could just use some glittery resin. Now look at this one. This is my first attempt that went completely wrong. I decided to use baby oil. And with the baby oil, there was no movement of the glitter. So that one was a mistake. This one you've yet to see me fill. And the last one, well, that's a whole different story, which I'm not going to get into because I've had enough of that whole episode. However, I did manage to rectify the problem with this one by emptying it and refilling it off camera. So, yeah. You'll see that one finished later on. So let me show you the best method I came up with after all my experiments. I'm using my drill attachment on my Dremel, and I'm drilling 2 holes at the bottom in the side of the coaster. I found that filling it from the side rather than the surface is the best way to do it if you don't want a big pocket of air trapped in there. It's just a much easier way to fill it. And the reason I'm making 2 holes is because as you're filling it through one hole, you need another hole for the excess air to escape from the coaster, otherwise it won't work. So here I have a syringe with no needle on or anything, it's just a crafting syringe. And in that little jug, I've got a solution of 50% distilled water and 50% glycerin. And the reason I didn't show you mixing it is because I couldn't find my glycerin. And luckily, I had a bottle of mixed up solution from when I made my snow globe pyramid, probably about 2 years ago, I think. But like I've already said, I don't like wasting anything, so my leftover solution was kept in a bottle and I ended up using that just because I hunted high and low for my glycerin and couldn't find it. So anyway, I've filled up my syringe, I'm putting it into the hole and pressing down, and that's how easy it is to fill it. It will need several applications to get it full all the way to the top, but that was so much easier than doing it the other ways that I tried that failed. And that little barrier that I made came in quite handy, look. Once I'd finished filling it with the solution, it was time to plug the holes, and I decided to use hot melt glue. But typically, just as I started, I realised I needed a new stick of glue in my glue gun. Isn't that typical timing? And it's always difficult when you start off a new stick of glue, isn't it? You've got to kind of press it at the same time. So it didn't film well, but hopefully you'll get the gist of what I did. So once I'd finished squeezing the glue into the holes, I did press down with my finger to flatten it, but it was very hot, so safety warning there, you could burn your finger doing this. Luckily I had gloves on, so it wasn't too bad, but yeah, probably not recommended. Right, once that glue was dried, I just needed to slice off the excess with my craft knife. This is not recommended for children. Okay, we're nearly at the end. Before adding my top layer of resin, I just wanted to add some finishing touches. Here I'm just going around the edge with a chrome marker from Let's Resin. It's a gold one and I just wanted to give it that extra finishing touch. Now, because these coasters are very deep, there was kind of a lot of side of the coaster on view, and also there was the 2 places where I'd filled it with the glue that didn't look particularly nice, and I just wanted those sides to look better and to get an extra seal around where the glue was. So what I decided to do was squeeze out some UV resin into a silicone pot, add some chunky glitter from Let's Resin, this is the opal gold, mix it all together, and then I just smoothed it around the coaster with my finger before curing it under the lamp. And that way I got an extra seal around where the holes were, which was good, and it also just made the sides look a little bit more interesting. So I repeated this on all 4 coasters. For the mountain ones, I decided to use some fine silver glitter to make them a little bit different, and that worked nicely as well. So now all that's left to do is to give it a nice top coat of resin, and once again I'm using Let's Resin's regular resin because it has a high heat tolerance, which makes it great for coasters. I like to just put a puddle of resin in the middle and then just tease out the resin with a micro brush to the edges, and that way I don't end up with too much. Just add a little at a time, and if you find when you get to the edges and it's completely covered that it's not quite doming as much as you would like it to, just add a little bit more to the middle and it self levels nicely. And yeah, that's the best way to do it. If you put too much on at first, you'll end up with too much and it will go down over the edges. The thing is, these have got a little bit of a ridge around the edge, as I mentioned before, because I didn't fill the coasters right up to the top, and you naturally get a kind of ridge around the edge, and that works perfectly when it comes to this stage and you don't want to be losing your resin down the side of your coasters. So once that was cured, I was happy with the way they looked. I loved the edges with the glitter on. I think that helped so much. But I just felt that the background image would stand out more if it had something behind it. So I tried some blue card behind it, and I felt that that made a big difference. So I decided to cut circles of the blue card out and stick them to the back of the coasters with PVA glue. And once that was finished, I did actually cover that as well on the back with some sticky backed felt just to protect it, because if that's going to be on a wet surface, you just don't want just paper to be on the back of your coaster, do you? So yeah, the adhesive felt on the back protects your surface, but it also protects the paper on the back of the coaster. And I think they looked so much better. Let's look at them in action. So I think this one is my favourite, just about the right amount of glitter, but it could have done with a little bit more, I think, a little bit. And with most of them, I just needed more glitter. But you learn as you go along, don't you? I'll know next time to be a little bit more generous. This one didn't do anything at all because I thought it would be a good idea to use baby oil. Yeah, this is the one that went wrong, but you can still see that the idea works without the moving glitter. You could just use glitter and resin if you wanted to. And this one, again, hardly any movement, hardly any glitter in there. I was too stingy. This one was better. You can see the glitter moving, but still, more glitter, Lou. Oh dear. But anyway, I think they're magical. What do you think? It was a lot of work, there were a lot of steps involved, but overall I'm thrilled with the finished result and I enjoyed the process and learned a lot from it, and I hope you did too. If you enjoyed the video, please do give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you would like to, and I will see you again next time. Thank you for watching and bye for now.